Hi, everybody. I'm Liz McGill, the Dean of the Law School, and I am delighted to welcome you to this Constitutional Law Center conference, a big fix should we amend the Constitution. So happy to see so many old friends and I hope new friends of mine and Stanford's here for this weekend. I want to just start by saying thank you to a variety of people. First, of course, to Michael McConnell for his leadership of the Constitutional Law Center, working with Mark Storsley, organized this conference. Every year, the center creates many intellectual feasts throughout the academic year. Often this conference is the sort of high point of the year, and this is no exception. It's a lot of work to put a conference like this together and to get this collection of star power to comment on this timely topic. So I'm very grateful to you, Michael. Thank you. And to Mark Storsley, who I know has done heavy lifting in this conference, and as well as Trish Gertridge and her team in the program group, who of course are not in here right now. They have made everything seem seamless, but as you all know, it takes a lot of work to make things seem seamless. So I don't have a lot to say about the substance of this conference, except I'm dying to know what you decide. I suspect there will be advocates of fixes, advocates that no fix is necessary, and advocates of what you might think of as a big dig, like perhaps we should bury some things. The only thing I wanted to say on the substance is to inspire you with the 27th Amendment, which I'm sure you all know the story of well. What you propose today might be ratified 202 years from today, which would be 2219 if I've got my math right. So don't think in the short term, think in the long term. You could take from 1789 to 1992 to ratify what you're proposing, and that's a long way ahead of us. So think big. That's my only admonition. I can't wait to hear what you decide on these great topics. I'm going to turn it over to Michael now. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Dean McGill, panelists, distinguished guests, students, I don't know who else I've left out, but welcome to this conference. I think that I want to explain just why I think the conference is timely. Maybe that's obvious, but Tocqueville wrote that there, and I'm quoting, "There is hardly a political question in the United States which does not sooner or later turn into a judicial one." And by that he usually meant a constitutional one. And the corollary of that is that whenever there's political dissent, it's translated into a demand for constitutional change. So there's hardly a political movement in the United States which does not sooner or later demand a constitutional change. But we haven't actually had very much constitutional change in the United States, or even come close to it. Really, 27 amendments is a pretty small number, especially when you consider that the first 10 were essentially immediate corrections and additions in the spirit of the original Constitution. And I think there are two reasons why the Constitution is so rarely amended. One is that it's really hard. You know, the procedural voting requirements for it are so hard that it's just very difficult to get them done. But also because discontent tends to come from dissenters, whereas constitutional change requires people in power, and indeed a supermajority of people holding office, in order to support change. And so those two things don't add up to constitutional change very often. If you look across American history, there have been periods of intense constitutional discontent and calls for change, and then there have been periods of relative quiet. Jefferson, our third president, believed that the Constitution we should have a new constitutional amendment, a convention every generation, which he calculated to be 19 years, because we don't want to be too entrenched. And when he was elected president in 1800, they regarded this as they literally called it a revolution. They immediately repealed the Judiciary Act and even impeached a Supreme Court justice because of their discontent with the way things have been going with the Constitution in the court. Now, Jefferson believed that they were returning to the true meaning of the original Constitution. That's not always the case. Late 1850s was probably the biggest period of serious discontents. People were so discontented that 15 states even left the Union, scrapped the Constitution altogether, and wrote a new one for themselves. You know, they're called the Confederate States of America. You know, how did that work out? Then another period of real constitutional ferment was the Progressive Era. There were 3 amendments passed during the Progressive Era, but this was tip of the iceberg in terms of the demands. We had major political figures calling for constitutional conventions to create a new constitutional order. This was, I would say, at least in modern times, the most serious period of serious constitutional demands we've seen. Well, today it seems to me that we're in another such era. That I don't think I have heard as many serious people worry about the fundamental character of the United States Constitution in my life. Now, and I'm not talking just about the last few months, I'm talking about the last, perhaps, decade. Right? Now, some of this is partisan. You know, some of this has to do with people who just can't imagine that, you know, fill in the blank, Obama, Trump, George W. Bush, can't imagine that the American people would put such a person in charge of the polity. But I think a great deal of it actually stretches across administrations to a sense that there is something deeply awry in the way our institutions are working, that it is ceasing to be possible, that Americans really have lost the knack of governing ourselves, at least under these institutional arrangements. You know, we've been now through 2 8-year and we're now 113 days into yet another presidency, but who's counting, in which the political process seems incapable of rising to the challenges of the days in which we live. You know, left or right, you know, the most serious questions and those that require serious sacrifice in the short term to avoid long-term calamity seem to go unaddressed. And you know, perhaps most worrisome is the fact that is a change in the factional character of our political life. Famously, James Madison argued that a country as large as the United States would have enough diversity of interests, sects, parties, factions, that they would cancel each other out. And he said, and I quote, given this great variety of interests, et cetera, which a coalition of a majority of the whole society could seldom take place on any other principles than those of justice and the general good. And yet something seems to have happened. Maybe it has to do with the nationalization of our politics. Maybe it has to do with the polarization of our politics, in which this idea of a multiplicity of sects and interests and thoughts and ideas no longer seems to be working, and instead we have 2 groups of Americans and 2 groups of leaders who don't understand what the others are saying, don't like the other people, aren't listening and aren't talking to each other, and certainly aren't working together. So on the one, what's the product of this? On the one hand, we have gridlock in which very little gets done, and then when something does get done, it tends to take the form of lengthy, incomprehensible, one-party legislation that doesn't reflect the best ideas of both sides, but rather reflects only one side's ability to put together something, anything, that will keep their extremes on board for ramming something through the Congress. And so under these circumstances, the president becomes the only body within the government that seems to be able to do anything. And so we lurch with, I think, a number of presidents in a row in a direction of unilateral presidential government, maybe even bordering in some cases on incipient authoritarianism, and also in unresponsive bureaucratic government that the people don't understand and can't control. And so we have the question, can it be fixed? And that's what we're here to talk about, is the big fix. Lots of constitutional discontent in our country. Can any of this discontent be expressed in terms of positive programs, proposals that might actually make our collective life together better, and an opportunity to talk across divides, I hope. So the way this conference is organized is that my colleagues and I put together a list of what we thought were some of the major areas of constitutional discontent. And then we invited people from around the country trying, and I think with some degree of success, but you'll be the judge of that, to get people of differing views within each of these categories. So you're going to see a series of panels on equality, on federalism, on separation of powers, on the amendment process itself, and I hope see constructive disagreement within each of them. And we'll also have a panel, which actually I'm looking forward to more than any of the others, of Stanford students who gave serious thought over a period of several months to what did they think the Constitution needs for a change for the future. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn this over to Mark Storsley for the first panel.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Michael.